everyone. My name's Ayisha, and I'm here today with Farah. We're talking about grief and loss, and there's so many different types of grief and loss. Lots of people experience it very differently. And today, like I said, we're here with Farah, who is going to discuss her experience of losing her 8-week-old beautiful baby boy, Sulaymaan. And it's obviously not something that is usually talked about as much because people don't know how to talk to grieving parents. People don't know how to approach people who are grieving, and it's obviously very uncomfortable to discuss. But every year there's a week. It's called the Baby Loss Awareness Week, where bereaved parents, friends, and family unite with us across the world to commemorate the lives of babies who have died during pregnancy, at birth, or soon after birth and infancy. This is on the 9th and 15th of October, 9th to the 15th of October, and it's there to help raise awareness about pregnancy and baby loss in the UK. So, firstly, Farah, thank you so much for coming on to talk to us today, and for wanting to actually discuss this. I can imagine it's really hard to talk about, and so please share whatever you're comfortable with, and if you want to stop at any time, just let me know. So I know it's been around 2 years since the passing of your son, and I think with that, again, we really want to thank you for talking about it, because obviously this must be very hard for you to talk about. But I guess the first question really is can you talk us through your experience really right from the start?
Yeah, no, that's fine. So I had quite a normal pregnancy. I naturally conceived, um, all fine. The only slight thing that happens in quite a lot of pregnancies, I guess. It does make it slightly more high risk, but I did have gestational diabetes. Only found that out about maybe 4 weeks before he actually ended up being born. Um, so I was 30 weeks and 2 days pregnant when he was delivered, but up until then, I everything was absolutely fine. Um, I, but 3 days before, noticed a slight reduction in movements. But he was still moving at that stage. And I had an appointment, I remember, on the Monday for physio because I had slight muscle pain in my ribs. And I had an appointment at, I think, 8:15 in the morning, something really stupidly early, because I also had to be at work for, I think, 10 o'clock. Um, so in my head, I think appointment was done just before 9. I thought, let me pop into Mac. I think 3 weeks before this, I'd had one other occasion where movements weren't really happening, or they hadn't happened up until that point in the day. And then when I went in, midwives did a Doppler scan. They said everything's fine. Um, and then he actually started moving and was moving for the rest of the evening until I went to sleep. So in my head, I thought it's going to be the same thing. I'm going to go in. They're going to tell me, it's nothing and everything's fine. So I went into Mac. Midwives put me onto a fetal monitor, which is what they put you on just to monitor baby's heartbeat. And that actually monitors movements as well, because it monitors the heartbeat going up and down. When a baby is moving, their expected heartbeat is meant to go up and down. And it looks a bit like an ECG when it's coming out. So it comes out on a paper like a bit like an ECG. So I was on that. She came around every 10 minutes to check it. So first 10 minutes, she extended it for 10 more. She extended it for 10 more. After 30 minutes, she came in, she tore it off. She left me on it, but she said, I'm going to go up and show the consultant. I didn't really think anything at this point.
Yeah.
Because I could hear on the fetal monitor, I could hear a constant heart rate. So I wasn't overly concerned. Um, she came back down and she said that, we just want to take you up to the delivery suite. The consultant wants you up there for closer monitoring. At this point, I was thinking, oh, okay. But even then, they didn't give me too much reason for concern, so I wasn't that concerned. I was alone at that point, so, and I'd forgotten to take my notes with me for some bizarre reason. So uh my husband at the time, I called him and said that, I need my notes, and can you come to the hospital with them. I also didn't alarm him because I just thought, it won't be anything too much of a big deal. But I mean, I remember he took about an hour, maybe just over an hour to arrive. By the time he'd arrived, I'd gone up. I'd been told that I'm not allowed to eat or drink anything. Because it was quite early, I ended up not having had anything that day. And I remember I'd gone to the shop and bought something from the Marks and Spencer downstairs. And then the midwife specifically had to tell me that you're not allowed to eat, which is when I figured out that something's wrong. By the time my husband arrived at that, I'd already spoken to two midwives and a registrar, and I had quite a good idea that there's quite a high chance I'll have a C-section on that day. I didn't know exactly what was going on because I hadn't had a scan and I hadn't seen the consultant yet, but I'd managed to figure that much out.
So how long was this in a space of?
About an hour and a half.
Wow, okay, fine.
Um, and then I remember one consultant came. He did a scan and he was a bit confused. He was quite a young consultant. I think he was a new consultant. So he said that I don't feel comfortable enough or experienced enough to make the call to deliver your child because you are only 30 weeks pregnant. I don't want to deliver a child who doesn't need delivering this early, if that's the case. So they said that we just want to wait for a second opinion. Second consultant took about maybe another hour and a half to come. By the time he came, he literally came, did a scan. His scan literally lasted about a minute. The other consultant, I remember he scanned and he scanned for a little while because he was trying to gauge what he should do. Um, this one came, he said to me that, your baby's very poorly. He's pumping excessive blood to his brain and he is not moving at all. And he's not going to survive very long. We need this baby out of there as soon as possible. Um, so usually when babies born early, they give you 2 steroid shots because the steroid shots like artificially give the lungs support so that when they're delivering, babies are able to breathe a bit
Sorry,
better. But they only gave me one shot because there was.
sorry, you just cut off. Well,
Sorry, I
why
didn't hear that.
so why, sorry, you said that they give the shots to, basically, is it just to stabilize the lungs?
Yeah, because the lungs are the last thing that develop in pregnancy because the baby doesn't need them until the baby's meant to be born. So they give them to artificially develop them so that baby's hopefully going to be able to cope to try and breathe. But they only gave me one shot because there's a certain spacing that has to happen between them. They didn't have enough time to wait to give me the second one. They give you something called magnesium oxide. I can't remember why they give you that. They gave me that, and then literally I walked to theatre, and they did what they need to do to prepare for the C-section, and they delivered him.
Oh my gosh.
When they delivered him, he did try to cry, but it was very, very weak, and he did need resuscitation immediately. Resuscitation meaning he needed the help with breathing. I mean, he was alive, he just couldn't breathe by himself. So they did that for a little while with the gas mask on, and then they wheeled him out to neonates. And I remember they just as they wheeled him out, they lifted the gas bag from him, and they said to me, turn your face and you'll be able to see him. So I saw him in his little trolley, and then they were just like, okay, we need to go now. So I saw him for about 2 seconds, and then they wheeled him out and they took him to the NICU, which is the neonatal intensive care. I
And
then wasn't able to see him for a bit.
had they explained
Sorry,
why?
what did you say?
Did they explain why they'd, that they're doing this at this point?
I don't. They didn't know why. All they knew is that they were supporting the baby with what baby needed.
No.
They didn't know what baby was going to come out like either. So they knew he wasn't very well in utero, but they didn't know what the situation was going to be like when he was delivered. So it was all very up in the air at that stage.
I mean, you must have been shocked at
I
this.
remember my
No, I'm just saying that you must have been shocked
I
because
was
actually you were
I
going
was
into
really
it
upset, to be honest. I mean, I wasn't expecting it. I went in at 9, he was delivered at 3:25, 24.
um,
Like that's how fast it was. So, you know, it wasn't what I went in for. I was expecting to go to work at 10 o'clock. I phoned work saying I might be a little bit late because I'm just getting checked by the midwives. I didn't think what was about to unfold is what was going to unfold. But, the people around me were really good. The doctors, the midwives, they were really, really good. I remember when I came out, um, I obviously had a spinal block, so I couldn't walk. They don't let you go anywhere or move or anything until you can move yourself. So they wouldn't ever wheel you in a bed or anything like that. So I had to wait. He was born at 3:24. I didn't get to see him till 11 at night.
oh my gosh.
Um, and I remember the midwife, she phoned 3 times. She went down a couple of times just to check for me what was going on because I had no idea at that stage what was happening. Then eventually his dad, my sisters, they managed to go down and see him. And then I had a little bit of, okay, at least they've seen him. And, um, I still didn't see him. He was a good weight. They told me that he was £3 11, which for a 30-week baby is a good weight. And I saw over the weeks that there was a lot of babies a little bit older, some a little bit younger, that were coming in at very small weights, sort of £1, £2. So his weight was a positive. It was something that was on his side. Um,
Yeah,
and then when I went to see him, he was ventilated, um, but he was okay. He was okay. He was ventilated, but he wasn't on 100% oxygen. He was doing a lot of the work himself. He was only about 40%, I think, and I think I can't remember exactly, but I think 25% is air or 23. I can't remember exactly. So he wasn't having to work overly hard with the oxygen levels. So that was a positive. Um, Over the next couple of days, things sort of were unfolding, and they still weren't 100% sure why he wasn't well in
yeah,
utero. Um, he came off the vent on the Wednesday, so he was born on the Monday. He came off the ventilator because they thought that he's doing well enough.
yeah,
And that's when they realized that he wasn't 100% okay, because when they take babies off the ventilator, they lower sedation slowly, but eventually they're on zero morphine because they don't need it because they're not intubated anymore. And what they realized is that he hadn't cried because his mouth was no longer, there was um nothing blocking his airway or anything like that. He hadn't cried. When they were doing blood gases with the heel pricks, he was just letting them. He was just laying there and like, fine, do what you want.
crying.
No, he wasn't even trying to fight them off. So Thursday morning, I remember they said to me, your baby's quite poorly. We're unsure what's wrong with him, so we're going to do a few tests. They were going to do a kidney ultrasound, a lumbar puncture, and one other test that I can't remember. Um, and I said to them, I want to be present while they do it. They did check, they were like, usually mums can't handle stuff like that. I was like, no, that's fine. I would like to be there. So they came, the registrar came to do the lumbar puncture, but before they do the lumbar puncture, he did a heel prick blood gas. And all I remember is I was stood next to his incubator, and I mean, he was quite busy reading the blood gases, and he was obviously quite concerned. And all I remember him saying as he was leaving the bit that Sulaymaan was in was, "This baby needs to move to LGI." Now, Sulaymaan was actually delivered in the smaller hospital in Leeds, which was called St James, that had a smaller neonates. The bigger neonatal ICU was in Leeds General Infirmary, which was the bigger children's hospital. So in my head, if he needed to be moved, something major was wrong. So obviously it had only
Yeah,
been 3 days since delivery. I was very hormonal, So I became quite hysterical. I got really upset. Quite soon after, a consultant came down. My mum was already in with us. She was around, so she came, and baby's dad was there, and she took us into a room and she just sat us down and said that, we did blood gases. We were going to do some tests, but baby is not well enough for them to happen, because when we've done blood gases, a particular thing called the lactate, it's supposed to be lower than 2. It's come up as 18 on his blood gas, which is very, very, very high. And we haven't got the machines that we need to check him at the moment. So we're going to transfer him over to LGI. It then took him about 5 hours to stabilize him enough to move him into the incubator for the travel incubator. And then we went on an ambulance ride to LGI. When we got there, the first thing they did was an echocardiogram, because they were concerned about his heart. And it was, I mean, I remember speaking to the doctor and he said, we've checked his heart structure, which we were concerned about, and it's all completely fine. So, it gave my heart some peace that, you know what, okay, that's fine. Over the next few days, they did do a few other things. They did a brain ultrasound. They did find that he had a slight bleed in the brain, but it's very normal for premature babies to have them, and apparently they get better over time slowly. So most premature babies have it. So it wasn't something that was, oh my God, shocking. Even within those couple of days, they thought that he had something wrong with his liver, but then after a few days, that had started to fix itself. So things were looking better. He went to LGI on the Thursday. He came off the vent on the Sunday. I think he cried for the first time later that evening. Um, things were looking better, but then on the doctor's round on the Monday, he noticed that Sulaymaan was hypertensive. So he had high blood pressure especially for his gestation. So they queried that, and they have 3 different drugs that they treat normal neonates babies with, because apparently it's an issue that happens in prem babies as well. So they started on the first drug. I think the first one they tried was hydrolazine. It did nothing. They upped the doses, however many they were meant to do hourly or whatever. I can't remember exactly. They realized that isn't going to work. They went on to the next drug. That one did nothing. Then the third drug was something called SNP. Then they were out of options. Then they decided they need to involve other departments. And they decided on the Tuesday morning they needed to call cardiology down. And the cardiologist came down and did another echocardiogram. At this stage, they did have an idea that one of my, so I don't know if I mentioned, but I'm no longer married. My marriage broke down very soon after Sulaymaan passed away. So my previous sister-in-law had a son who had passed away just about 16 months beforehand, and they looked into that a little bit, and they had some inklings, but obviously I'm not going to talk about that anymore, and they didn't really discuss it with me excessively, but they had some inklings of what they were looking for,
like a genetic,
by looking at that. Yeah, then they were looking for something genetic. When they did the echocardiogram, I still remember cardiologist sat down, she put her hand on my knee. I was sat on a chair, she kneeled next to me, put her hand on my knee, and she said, what your son's got, I've never seen before. And from that, I just knew, when you just know, she wasn't a really young cardiologist. She was, knowledgeable enough to know that she's probably seen quite a few different things and quite a few different cases. So I remember I just burst into tears, because for me, it was like someone telling me that, you know what, your child's going to die. That in my head, that's what I heard at that time. So then they involved quite a few different people. Endocrine needed to come down. Endocrinologist came down, and he's the first person who explained to me, this is what we think it is. Genetic test takes 2 weeks, but we're pretty sure it's this, because he's got calcification in the coronary arteries. which means that normally they would be, you know, wide and flexible, so they were able to do that when the heart pumps out. But the calcification meant that they were rigid and they were narrowed because the calcium was developed inside the
So the
the, the
calcium
inner
comes up
walls.
stays there. Right, okay, fine. And then it, in turn, it's not helping to
Yeah,
pump
so at
anything.
that stage, they told me that his heart was only functioning at 17%.
Right.
So it wasn't looking good, and they did tell me that they didn't think he was going to make it now.
Mm.
Um, but nevertheless, they were going to try. They were looking into that hospital had never seen that condition before.
Really? This
There
is,
was
and
one hospital,
this is the bigger unit. This is the one that you've
yeah.
been, and they still don't
There was
see it.
only one other doctor in the UK who had seen it.
Wow, so it's that rare.
Yeah. So he did come over a few days later from Manchester. His prognosis wasn't any better. He did say to me that he dealt with a pair of twins a few years back, and he said that the brother had very similar calcification to my Sulaymaan in the coronary arteries, and, you know, quite severe, especially around the heart. And he didn't make it. He only survived 4 weeks. And the sister had it lower down in the aorta, but she made it because it wasn't directly in the coronary arteries.
Wow.
Um, but they tried very, very hard. They were really good. There was drugs that they needed that were unlicensed that they struggled to get hold of. They still took it to the board. You know, the hospital did everything they could to try and fight it. They contacted doctors in Philadelphia who are doing quite a lot of research on this at the moment. They did everything they could to try and fight his corner for him. And I do believe that they did think that he wouldn't make it through the second week, and he lived 8 weeks because of the efforts they made. You
Wow.
know, I do believe that it did prolong his life
Yeah. As much as it
that
could.
much.
Yeah.
Um, so that's kind of, I mean, after that, it was just the inevitable happened. They did think that before the medication would work, he would go into heart failure. He ended up going into heart failure.
Right.
And then once he went into heart failure, he only survived a week after that.
Right. Okay. So it's because of the heart failure in the end.
Yeah.
That's what
His heart
happened.
couldn't handle the pressure because it had to pump excessively hard to get the blood out because the arteries weren't working with it because of the calcification.
My gosh. I mean, this sounds like, you just kind of gone in for a scheduled routine, appointment, thinking you were going into work that same day, and then, having an emergency C-section, which is traumatizing enough, actually. Having to go to theatre, and, not even knowing what's happening, really. I mean, it sounds like you didn't actually know what was happening most of the time until,
The
maybe a
thing
week
is,
later.
you know, the weird thing is, even the doctors, they like he put them all in such a difficult boat because a lot of the time they didn't have answers for my questions because they just didn't know. And
Yeah.
we only managed to put pieces together at the meeting that I had with them after he died. So they have a particular routine bereavement appointment where we talk about the case and you ask any questions you have. And once that happened, we were able to piece together even certain things within the pregnancy. Because I remember when he was delivered, there was a gushing and gushing and gushing of liquid. And I remember thinking, what on earth? And the registrar popped her head round because obviously they put curtains so you can't see what's happening. She popped her head round from the curtain and she said, that's how much excessive amniotic fluid you had because it's still gushing. So it's called being polyhydramnios. That's something that's quite normal in the condition of GACI. Most pregnancies where they have where the babies have GACI are polyhydramnios. But they only actually worked that out in that appointment. You know, they only then managed to put the pieces together, and that's why he was struggling in the womb because of his calcifications.
Right. If you've been affected by any of the issues that we've discussed, there is help out there. There are resources and some websites that we've got linked down in the description box below. Thank you.